You're listening to Taste for Truth Weight Loss Encouragement. I'm your host, Barb Raveling. Hey everyone, it's so good to be here with you in my last full podcast. And so I'm doing this podcast with kind of sadness because it's been so fun to do this Taste for Truth podcast. And I'm going to leave it up and running because who knows, maybe someday I'll add more episodes, but at least for right now and for, at least a long time, I'm not going to be doing any more episodes on this podcast. And maybe this will be the last episode. It's hard to say. But I've so enjoyed joining hands with all of you in working on breaking free from the control of food. And also, we've had a few episodes on breaking free from the control of skinny. So I was thinking, what should I do for my last full episode? And I thought, it might be nice to do an episode that just kind of gave the basic rundowns of how do you break free from an overeating stronghold and how do you break free from a skinny stronghold. So I'm going to talk about both of those on this episode. Let's start by talking about strongholds. What is a stronghold? So in the Old Testament, a stronghold was an actual physical place of safety. It was a fortress, someplace that they would actually go to when the enemy was attacking and they could be physically safe from the enemy. It was a fortified place. Okay, but there's also a spiritual stronghold in the Old Testament, and David talked about it. He talked about running to God as his stronghold, running to God as his place of refuge. So when the enemy is coming, sure, they could run to that physical stronghold, but you know how it is when we're afraid, we have all those emotions going on. And so we run to God and we trust in God, and he is our place of safety. And that's who God was for David. And God wants to be that for us as well. When our life is hard, he wants us to run to him for safety. He wants to be our place of refuge. And he wants to be our place where we go to him as our stronghold, our place of refuge. But here's the thing. We don't always go to God first. And one of the things we run to as our place of safety and our place of refuge is food, right? How many times have you and I run to food when life is hard, and we run to food because it'll make us feel better? And it does make us feel better for the whole time of anticipation while we're driving to the Dairy Queen or wherever we're going. We're feeling great. And then we have our little food and we feel really great for a little while, but not for very long. It's only great for while we're eating it and a little while afterwards. But the thing is, the more we develop that habit of running to food for our place of safety, the more that food controls us and we can't break free from it. And so the interesting thing is we can also run to skinny for a place of refuge. Now it's a little bit different. We run to food when we want relief from life, when we want escape. But we run to skinny, I think maybe to boost our confidence. So we feel like, people will only respect us if we're skinny, or they'll only listen to us if we're skinny. So we feel like, if we can just be skinny, life will be better. And that's what I used to feel like back in the days when food was controlling me and I was always struggling with my weight. I thought if only I could lose this weight, life will be great. So can you see how I was also making skinny my place of refuge, where I thought, okay, if I can just get skinny, life will be great. So how do you break free from a stronghold? Well, first of all, let's talk about how it's created. We already talked about how it's created in a little bit. We talked about how we run to it, and that's habit makes us feel safe. And so we create it by the habit of going to food. But it's also created by lies, okay? So the reason we go to food for safety, or we think skinny will solve all our problems, is because we're believing lies. We're believing that this food will make me feel better, or I can't live without this food. And in all my books, I talk about all the lies. I won't go into that this much in this podcast. And same thing, we talk about some of the lies with making skinny a stronghold, where if we're skinny, life is going to be better. If we're skinny, we're going to get everything we want and people are going to look at us differently. So that stronghold is built on lies. So if you picture the old stronghold in the Old Testament, like a fort, maybe a big strong wall, let's say it's this big strong wall built to rocks. If we look at this spiritual stronghold that in a negative sense that we created with food and skinny, it's built of lies. All those little lies we believe are little rocks in that wall. So when we renew our mind, which I've talked about in all of my books, how to break free from a stronghold or how to break free from overeating is to renew our mind. Each time we renew our mind, we're taking one of those rocks out of that wall because we want that stronghold to crumble. We want that wall to fall so that we start seeing food for what it really is and skinny for what it really is. And we make God our place of refuge. So I think we'll talk about how to break free from each of those strongholds separately. So let's talk about how to break free from a overeating stronghold first. Okay, the first thing we need to do if we're going to break free from an overeating stronghold is to set boundaries that will help us avoid going to it for refuge. And I talk about boundaries a lot of times in my books, and I give you some examples of boundaries. So those boundaries have to be something that will keep us from going to food for refuge. So if I set a boundary of 3 meals a day, and in the afternoon, I have this horrible task that I'm supposed to do, and I'm like, oh, I don't want to do that task, and I want to run to food and eat that instead. The boundaries will say, no, Barb, you can't run to food for refuge because your boundaries say you can only eat at breakfast, lunch, and dinner, right? So those boundaries help us with that. So we have boundaries in place overall that kind of regulates how often we can eat during the day or what types of foods we can eat. And you can look at that. I probably have the most on boundaries in my book, Say Goodbye to Emotional Eating. That's probably the one I have the most on boundaries in. But, I've talked a lot about that already. So you probably all know what boundaries are. Boundaries can be, I eat only when I'm hungry and I don't eat when I'm full, or it could be a certain plan. You might have a Weight Watchers plan or something like that. So it'll be some sort of plan that limits your food, that keeps us from eating whatever we want, whenever we want, because that's one of those things that creates a stronghold for us since we have a tendency to run to food for refuge. And so you have the boundary that tells you how often or how much you can eat or what types of foods you can eat. But you might also want to consider making boundaries with problem foods, because another problem with eating being an emotional stronghold is that some of those foods that we eat are kind of addictive, either foods or drinks. People struggle with alcohol as well. If they're addictive, then we also have that physical urge. So not only do we have the emotional urge to go to them for help with life, we have that physical sensation where we're kind of addicted to it. And as soon as we have some, we want more. So there's that problem too. And I would say back when I broke free from the control of food, it was the first time in my life I gave up sweets and I was willing to give them up for life. Before that, I was never willing to give them up for life. So I did it for a season to lose weight, but I'm like, life will never be fun without sweets. I don't want a boring life. Of course, I'm going to eat sweets. But when I finally broke free, I recognized that sweets were an idol for me. So it wasn't carrots and celery and hamburgers that were an idol for me. For me, it's sweets. That's what I ran to for refuge when life was hard. And so I realized, and if I really going to love God with all my heart, all my soul, all my mind, for me personally, I had to be willing to give up sweets for my life. And so I did. But then as I kept renewing my mind and filling my mind with truth, then I didn't keep running to food for refuge. And so I eventually brought sweets back into my life. So even though I was willing to give them up for good if necessary, I felt later it was not necessary. And I, started having them in my life again. And I will still give them up every once in a while for a season if I feel like they have too much of a control on me. So actually right now we are in Lent. And I gave up sweets for Lent this year because I did feel like I was going to them a little too often. Okay, so first you set boundaries, and then you need to renew your mind every single time you find yourself breaking your boundaries, or ideally whenever you feel like breaking them. Okay? Here's why that's important. Every time you eat because of a lie, a lie like this will make me feel better, or it's not that big of a deal if I have this, or I'll start tomorrow. Every time you eat because of those reasons, you're reinforcing those lies. So if you think of that big stronghold built with little stones, you're adding more stones to the wall. You're making it harder to break in the future. So it's not so much eating the food that's the big deal. It's what are you going to do with the lie? Are you going to leave that lie unattacked? So if you go ahead and break your boundaries and eat outside your boundaries, it's really not that. Let me say it. It'll sound bad, but I was going to say it's really not that big of a deal. Of course, it is that big of a deal. And if you're going to put the truth to it, I would actually say that. But the far bigger deal is, are you going to renew your mind? Are you going to recognize that, hey, I just broke my boundaries. I'm reinforcing that lie in my life, and that lie is going to keep me bound into this habit. So if you broke your boundaries and you renew your mind, you write down the lie that made you break them, you write down the truth that will help you not break them next time, you're fighting with spiritual weapons. You're fighting with truth. And so try to do that. For absolutely sure, every time you break your boundaries, for even better, try and do it before you break your boundaries. I think for a while what I did is I said, if I renew my mind before I break my boundaries, I can do it without writing it down. So maybe I would have done my I deserve a donut. Well, actually, I didn't have, back when I was doing this, I didn't have my I deserve a donut questions. I think I've done this for other habits. But so you guys have the I deserve a donut questions available. If you want to renew your mind with those, you can make the rule that if I do it before I eat, I can do it in my mind without writing it down. But if I eat first, then I have to write down the answers to the I deserve a donut questions. And that's always hard, writing them down. We don't want to take the time to do it. So that could be like a little penalty. And now here's one thing to watch out for, because I'm telling you to renew your mind every time you feel like breaking your boundaries. But it is possible that you'll go on some type of an eating plan and you will have so much self-control that you're never going to break your boundaries, right? We've all done that without renewing our minds. Maybe we've done it for 1 month or 2 months or even a year. But eventually, if you haven't changed the way you are thinking, so if you're only relying on discipline, that discipline is going to run out someday, or it will run out when you have a new trial in your life. So that's why it's so important to keep renewing your mind. So you could even say, you know what, even if I'm in discipline, I'm just following my boundaries perfectly, I'm going to renew my mind twice a day. So you could maybe do the Taste for Truth Bible study in the morning, and then renew your mind with the donut questions or truth journaling at lunch, and again at 4:00. So that's actually 3 times a day if you consider the Bible study in the morning. So what you have to do is you have to get so much truth into your system that those lies are gone. So what happened with me is at first I didn't even see the lies. Like I couldn't even figure out what I was thinking. And I believed the lies so strongly they look like truth to me. Like, why would you not eat sweets if it's right there in your house? I would have believed that all the way. Of course, you eat ice cream if it's in your house. But then later on, I realized, oh, no, you don't. If it doesn't follow your boundaries, you don't eat the ice cream. And so at the beginning, you only see the lie. And then as you renew your mind more often, you see the truth at the same time as you see the lie. So that's going to happen as part of the process. And then eventually, you won't even see the lie anymore. So with me, I never binge anymore. And I never binge anymore because I renewed my mind so often every time I binged that I completely got rid of that lie. I've already broke my boundaries. I might as well eat as much as possible. Like I don't even believe that lie like 1% anymore. So I never ever stuffed myself for binge. And that's probably the big reason I've kept my weight off all these years, because if I break a boundary, it's just one little break, and one little break isn't going to make you gain a bunch of weight. It's all that binging so that you're going to start fresh the next morning. That's what puts all the weight on. Okay, so renew your mind every time you break your boundary. And I would recommend doing it with either Truth Journaling or my I Deserve a Donut app. Okay, and then another thing that you can do to break free is to take practical steps to make it difficult to go to your problem foods and easy to eat your healthy foods. So if you can, don't have your problem foods in the house. Okay. If you have kids, you might think, oh, wait, but they all want problem foods. But you know what? Those foods aren't that healthy for them either. And you could be helping to create problems in them by helping them have a lifestyle when they're young of always eating these foods. Whereas I knew one friend who family always ate super healthy when she was young, and she doesn't have any desire for it. Of course, if you're super strict and dogmatic and, say horrible things about it, then they might eat to rebel. So you kind of want to have that middle ground, not too loose, not too strict. But I would try to take practical steps to make it difficult to go to your problem foods. You could put them out in the car and the trunk and have to go all the way out there. You could have your spouse hide them. I've done that many, many times where I ask my spouse to hide things, and then you can't get mad at them if you ask where it is and they don't tell you. Or also, my husband's so willing to stop and get a blizzard for me, like on his way home from work or whatever. You could, if that was a problem, you could say, hey, even when I ask you, please don't stop and get that for you. Make me go out and get it myself. Because for me, I hate driving so much that I'm not willing to go out and get things for myself. So what kind of practical steps can you make to make it difficult to go to your problem foods? Just brainstorm a little list of things you can do. One thing you could do is you could limit sweets. So if you decide you have to get rid of sweets altogether, do that. But you could also limit them where you say, okay, I can't have any sweets in the house, or I can only have sweets on social occasions. So something like that is in a way, it's psychologically making your problem foods harder to eat if you put tight boundaries on them. Okay, but keep in mind, back when I was fully entrapped in this stronghold, I could make all these little rules, but I would break them the minute I made them. So that's why it's so important to renew your mind, because when you break them, if you renew your mind, you're working on dislodging that lie. You have to get rid of all those lies if you want to really change the way you think and counter the problem. Because here's the thing, lies create unhealthy desires, which creates unhealthy actions. So I'm believing these lies is creating an intense, strong desire to overeat. And then that trips me up. I'll go eat. Okay, the next step, start going to God rather than food when you counter trials. And this is important. So we need to find another refuge. It's really interesting. People who've had weight loss surgeries, a pretty high percentage of them start turning to alcohol rather than food, because whether we need it or not, we go to something when life is hard. And so I think the main culprits are food, alcohol, shopping, our phone, maybe watching TV or videos or something. So there's just so many things. Like if you think of life 200 years ago, how many of those things did people have to go for refuge? Like hardly any compared to us, right? So we have so many things to go for refuge. We don't want to just like break free from the control of food. We also want to make God first in our lives, right? We want to get super close to God. So some of those other things you go to, they might not have as big of consequences as we do with food, but they're still not helping us mature as Christians. They're not helping us to, love others better. They're not helping us to get our work done. They're not helping us to grow closer to God. So start going to God rather than food when you encounter trials. And for me, truth journaling was really a way to go to God for help. And also my questions have been a way to go to God for help. The questions are kind of like conversation starters, where you're not just asking God to do something for you, where it's kind of like a one-sided question. Instead, they're like conversation starters, where they open up a discussion with God. So you might answer the questions, then God might put a big truth in your life, and then you stop and you talk to him about it and thank him for it and acknowledge it. So the more you go to God for refuge, the closer that you will get to him, and the more he will be your refuge. So you're kind of developing a habit of going to God for refuge. Okay, so what will your new life look like when you break free from the control of food? Well, it will be much more peaceful. One of the best things about it is that you don't have that constant craving. And I would remind you again, it will depend on how often you renew to break free. So if you renew your mind enough and you'll break down that stronghold, and the lies will drive you to it after you lose weight. Because I would say that another danger point in this journey is once you lose your weight. Because here's what happens once you lose your weight. A lot of people give up their boundaries. So they'll give up their boundaries, or they'll relax their boundaries, and this will make them start gaining weight again. So you have to make sure that you have boundaries in place after you lose the weight. And if you switch them over, so like if you lose your weight with some sort of weight loss plan, and you don't want to stay in that plan your whole life, you don't want to stay in the maintenance version, you want to start having just 3 meals a day and 1 snack or something like that, you're going to have to in some ways start over a little bit with renewing. I would say you'll have to do another couple months of intense renewing to believe that these new boundaries you have are good boundaries and to keep away from the lies of those particular set of boundaries. So like a lot of people often believe with 3 meals and 1 snack, you'll have your meal and then afterwards you'll think of something else you want to eat and you'll say, oh, well, I would have had that for my meal. I'll just say that's part of my meal. Or you have a second helping and you'll just say, oh, well, that's part of my meal. So there's new little lies that you'll have to address once you change your boundaries. So once you lose your weight, go back to renewing. If you stop renewing for a while, go back to intense renewing for a couple months. And then also be watchful of new trials in your life. So if we have the tendency to go to food for help with life, I don't know that we'll ever get rid of that tendency. I think it'll still be a temptation. And when you have some new trial in your life that you haven't had before or some really big trial, you're going to be tempted to go back again. So that's why I would recommend just making a lifelong habit of renewing. If you've already gotten the habit of going to God for your negative emotions and going to Him for help with life, you already have that in place. So when that new trial hits, you shouldn't go back to eating a bunch. So for me, I had some of those new trials come up, and one of those new trials was writing. I didn't realize that I ate for procrastination. But the thing is, even though I had those trials, because I had renewed my mind so much when I was breaking free, it didn't make me gain weight. So it definitely made me tempted to go back to eating too much, but it wasn't enough to gain more than a couple pounds. And I don't think I ever had to go back to renewing a bunch, but some people do. Every person is different. You might have to go back to renewing. One of the things that helped me the most is recognizing that if I lost the weight by renewing, if I ever gain it back again, all I have to do is go back to renewing. Whereas in the past, there was no guarantee I would lose weight. I would try to lose weight maybe 20 different times. And out of those 20, maybe once, 1 out of 20, I could maybe follow through and actually lose some weight, stick to those boundaries for a couple months. But after I broke free from the control of food, that wasn't happening. I wasn't doing that cycle, gaining a bunch of weight, losing a bunch of weight, because I already had enough truth in my system that I could do it with self-control. Okay, and I would just say this is one of the questions I get asked the most. People write me and say, hey, what order should I do your Bible studies in? Okay, here's what I would recommend. I would recommend starting with the Taste for Truth Bible study. And when you do the Taste for Truth Bible study, use either truth journaling or I deserve a donut to renew your mind throughout the day. So do the Bible study in the morning, and you don't have to do a whole lesson if you don't want. Do a part of a lesson, and then renew your mind with either truth journaling or I deserve a donut questions at lunch, and again about 4:00. And you can shift those times to however they work. Basically, those times should be close to when you're going to have temptations for that day. And also they should be tied to a time when you can actually make yourself do it. So if you can make yourself do it before lunch, but not after, then renew your mind before lunch. And you could renew your mind like with some sort of temptation in mind that's going to happen later in the day. You could even look and say, hey, when am I going to be most likely to break my boundaries today? And renew your mind with that temptation line. So anyway, so that's what you could do if you decide to renew 3 times a day, or you could do the method I talked about previously where you renew every time you feel like breaking your boundaries, or at least whenever you do break them. The thing is, if you're not renewing, most days, at least 2 or 3 times a day, it's probably not enough truth to change the way you think. So you have to do this often enough to change the way you think. Okay, so I would do that Bible study first, and then after that, I would do Freedom from Emotional Eating, and that focuses more on the emotions. And with that book, you could do Say Goodbye to Emotional Eating if you want to include that. That has 100 renewing activities. So you could actually shift those around. So I'm just kind of recommending this. Like if you're doing it with the church, I think it's easier to do Taste for Truth Bible study for beginners. But a lot of people write to me and they say they love Freedom from Emotional Eating. So you can really do it either way. And here's the thing. A lot of people struggle with what boundaries to do, or they also struggle with which Bible study to do first. And when we struggle with making decisions like this, there's usually an idol or a stronghold fueling the decision, or a lie. And in this case, the lie is, I have to do this exactly right, otherwise I won't lose the weight and keep it off. When the truth is, there is no right. There's advantages to each. So if you want to work on your emotions first, then do Freedom from Emotional Eating. If you want to work more on boundaries first and following your boundaries, then I would do Taste for Truth first. Okay, I think that's about it for how to break free from emotional eating stronghold or overeating stronghold. Now let's talk about how do you break free from a skinny stronghold. Now this is interesting because we often don't really recognize the skinny stronghold. And in fact, the reason we addressed weight loss in the first place is because we really want to be skinny. And sometimes that skinny is an idol or a stronghold, or sometimes it just we want to be skinny. And that's okay if you start for that reason, because as you renew your mind, God's going to shift your thinking. But here's how to break a skinny stronghold. Now, I do have some lessons in the Taste for Truth Bible study on that, maybe 3 lessons, I'm not really sure. But I would set boundaries on any activity that fuels it. Okay, so one of the activities that fuels it might be scrolling through your social media and looking at all kinds of skinny people or movie stars and looking at them and saying, oh, I wish I were that skinny. So that could fuel it. Researching diets, researching exercise articles, that could fuel it. Going to the gym for a few hours a day, that could fuel it. Stepping on the scale a bunch of times a day, that could also fuel it. So all those activities kind of reinforce the lie that we have to be skinny, that's essential that we be skinny. And they kind of send us down that I have to be skinny at all costs aisle. Okay, the second thing you could do is renew your mind. So anytime you feel like I need to be skinny, renew your mind. I have some questions in I Deserve a Donut about that. And I also have some questions in the Renewing the Mind project in the Breaking a Habit section. Some of those questions would also help with breaking a skinny idol. So renew your mind whenever you feel like it. What you want to do is you want to get to the point where you see yourself as God sees you. So I think with skinny idols, a lot of times it's almost like, we get upset with men objectifying women or people objectifying women, say it's all about looks, but we do it to ourselves. So we beat ourselves up when that's one tiny little aspect of us. So we have to see ourselves as our whole personality, how God created us. So think about all the things you like to do, all your strengths, all the things you're good at. And then if you think of your weaknesses, overeating is just one of weaknesses. You have a whole bunch of other weaknesses. It was really funny because when I was working through this in my own life, well, way back in the day, probably before I even knew how to renew my mind, I thought, that's my big major problem in life. I could just get over that. Life would be good. And I didn't even recognize my other weaknesses and my other sins that God wanted me to work on in my life. And then as I renewed my mind more, the last 25 years of renewing, I have, recognized those other areas of change. So see yourself as a whole person, see yourself as your whole personality, see yourself as a unique creation of God. And then I think that will help. And renew your mind with the lies like, I have to be skinny, or it's terrible if I'm not skinny. Or a lot of times those lies come after a big binge. So at night, after a big binge, we beat ourselves up. We say, I'm never going to get skinny. And when we say I'm never going to get skinny, I might as well eat. Another lie that's kind of implied there is, life won't be worth living if I'm not skinny, or life will be terrible if I'm not skinny, or I might as well eat because I just did the worst thing in the world. I binged, right? Which none of those are true. And I don't know, maybe that's a little bit extreme, but those are possibilities. So it's really important to renew your mind. I would also renew your mind whenever you go to a social gathering. So if you feel insecure about your weight, like I used to do, it kept me from doing social things because I was embarrassed about my weight. So renew your mind, go out to those social things, but renew your mind beforehand so you walk in confident. And you'd think you renew your mind about, how you feel about yourself, but what worked better for me? What worked better for me was to pray for the people at the gathering I was going to. So I might pray 1 Corinthians 13 for them. Or I also would pray something in Colossians. I can't remember if it's Colossians 2 or 3, but I'll put that in the show notes. So I'd pray through some of those Bible verses that talk about loving others well. And I prayed them specifically thinking of the people at the social gathering I was going to. And that really helped me to go into the social gathering, not being insecure about how I looked, but thinking about talking to the people at the gathering. I think sometimes too, I think about, okay, what would I like to know about this person? Or what would I like to get updated on? And so I'd kind of think of questions to ask them. That would help too. And I did sometimes renew my mind. If I was going to renew my mind, I probably use the living up to expectations questions or the people pleasing questions or the feeling rejected and condemned questions. Because a lot of times if you're insecure not about everybody at the social gathering, but about a couple people. And those couple people might either be people who have condemned you for your weight before, or people who are, intimidating to you in some way because of how they look. So I would renew your mind with some of those questions. Feeling rejected and condemned might be the best, or feeling inadequate. Those are all questions in the I Discern a Donut app or Renewing the Mind project. And that will help you go in also confident. And if you think about it, God wants us to run to him for refuge, and he wants us to hold both skinny and food with open hands. But he also wants us to reach out to people. He wants us to love others well. And sometimes that stronghold of overeating, the stronghold of feeling like we have to be skinny, they can get in the way of loving others well, because we might, not reach out to certain types of people that intimidate us. So is this a lot to work on? Yeah, it's a lot to work on. But as we work on it, just step by step, feeling like we don't have to be perfect, we just keep making progress, we will draw closer to God, and we will draw closer to others too. Like when we give up these strongholds, we will enjoy others more socially. We won't be craving as much. We'll feel better about ourselves, and we're going to feel closer to God. So it's totally worth working on. And I pray that you guys will work on it. If you have not broken free yet, I pray that this is something that you will go to God for help with. I guess a final suggestion is I think it's so much better to do this in community. And I would try to find somebody else to do it with you. So either a friend. So I guess online, you can sometimes search like Taste for Truth Bible Study in Facebook groups, and you can find one going. But I do think it'd be better to do it with people in front of your face. So either like a little Zoom meeting, if it's people who don't live there, or somebody locally, a friend, or a church. See if you can get a Bible study at your church. I have leaders guides for all my books at my website. So you can find those at my website. Right now it's under the Bible studies tab, I think, but you'll be able to, if you search for it, you'll be able to find it. So I will keep this podcast going, all those past episodes. So you can still use those for support and encouragement, but for regular renewing, I think it's something you have to do actively, writing or typing. You can type in your truth journal. You don't have to write it. Something like that to change your thoughts, or even speaking truth out loud, like even speaking Bible verses out loud. If you memorize some of those Bible verses in the first 5 lessons of Taste for Truth, you could speak those out loud around your house during the day and kind of talk to yourself about them. That'd be another way you could renew your mind. So that'd be helpful too. Okay, well, I was also going to tell you guys I am doing online courses. You might already know this. I just finished my first one. I have one more lesson in it. I am loving doing those. They are so fun. I'm going to keep doing those, and all those online courses, they will be places where you can meet other people to do some of these Bible studies together, as I'm usually going to have opportunities for accountability and places where you can work on habits, including letting go of overeating, one of those habits. So look for those. Go to my website, barbravling.com/course. barbravling.com/course, and you can sign up to be notified of any new online courses I have. So that's going to be a good option. If you find that some trial in your life is something that's really, that's what's making you emotional eat, sometimes it's helpful to get counseling for that trial. I'm getting counseling right now for my perfectionism in writing, because that is something that's kind of made me take more time to write things than I really needed to take. So I attacked that, and I got a counselor to help me with that. I think I've only met with her 3 times. I'm not saying the problem solved. It seems too early to be solved, but it certainly helped me. I don't think I'll need that many more counseling sessions. But anyway, that's something you can do. And if you're interested in that and you don't have a local counselor you can go to getfaithful.com/Christian habits. getfaithful.com/Christian habits, and you can find a counselor there. And one thing I was surprised to see is that my Medicare paid for counseling. So that was actually kind of nice. I'm 65, just got on Medicare, and it was nice to find that out. Of course, you would have to check your own insurance to see if your insurance covers counseling, but I just thought I'd let you know in case you were like me and hadn't realized that insurance might cover counseling. Okay, guys, that's about it. I'm just going to do one more episode. They'll have some title like switching over to the Christian Habits podcast, because I'm going to keep that going. I'll probably do that one a little more often than I did before. It was just once a month before. I might do that once every 3 weeks, or, one little more often if I have interviews to do. So I will do some solo episodes on that, mostly interviews, and I might do some, weight loss, eating sorts of things on that as well. That's what I did way back in the beginning in the Christian Habits podcast. I did some of those in the Christian Habits podcast before I started the Taste for Truth podcast. So I hope you'll keep listening on the Christian Habits podcast. I know a lot of you guys already listened to it, and I will look forward to visiting with you on that. And hopefully I'll see you guys in some of my future online courses. I'm super excited about those as well. And before I end, let me just pray for you guys quick. Father, thank you so much for all these dear people who have struggled with eating and weight and feeling like they need to be skinny, just like I have struggled. And I remember how hard it was to feel like I'd never change. And Lord, I pray that you help them to create boundaries and to renew their mind whenever they feel like breaking them. I pray that you would help them to find somebody to help them be committed to renewing their mind, somebody to help them accountable to renewing their mind, Lord. And I pray that you would pour out truth on them, pour out truth on me, and change us and conform us to your image so that we can love you better and love others well. And so we can walk in the fruit of the Spirit, live a peaceful, joyful life with self-control. We thank you for all you've done for us so far and all the ways you bless us. And thank you for your goodness. In Jesus' name, amen. Okay, you guys, I will see you over at the Christian Habits podcast.